All right, welcome to Rattling the Brain, Season 2, Episode 2. Today we have a very special guest joining us. We have Ben Shulman, a rising talent in the baseball broadcasting industry and the voice behind the Toronto Blue Jays coverage. Following in the footsteps of his father, Dan Shulman, Ben started to make his own mark in the industry. Today we'll be diving into his career, his insights on the game, and the future of sports broadcasting. Ben, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So the first question I had for you is growing up in like a broadcasting kind of family, how did you find your own unique voice in the industry?
Yeah, it was it's unique, because not that many people do this. So I definitely started thinking about it, I think, from a young age. Whether it was, when I was a kid, I would go and turn on the games that my dad was doing and kind of found myself then watching other games and focusing as much on the broadcast really as what was going on in the action, probably just because that's what I would do when my dad was calling games. And so I ended up learning a lot just from listening to different people, throughout the industry in Canada and the US, depending on which sports I was watching, and started that way. And then the biggest thing probably for me having my own voice was while I was broadcasting in high school or getting into it in university and even a little bit after. My dad and I did not have a ton of back and forth about what I was doing. I think he thought this and I thought this too, that if he had too much involvement maybe in what I was doing, not that he wasn't listening or paying attention, but if he was, calling me after every game and giving me pointers and stuff like that, as helpful as it would be, it might turn me into a more similar broadcaster to him. So we kind of both decided separately, but it ended up happening that I would broadcast for a while, kind of find what I wanted to do. And then once I started working a little more consistently professionally, and I already had a bit of my own style going on, then we, started to talk a little bit more so that it wouldn't impact necessarily my voice and just be cleaning up certain things or adding things to what I can do.
I love it. So you must have been around baseball a lot growing up. Was there any other sports that you had like an interest in doing when you were younger, or was it always just baseball?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was definitely around baseball a lot. He does basketball in the winter too, so certainly, that piqued my interest. And then I grew up as big a hockey fan as any sport. So, I think really growing up, I would have been interested in doing any of the four major sports, football as well. And I got more insight into what it was like to call baseball games because when my dad was doing basketball, I was in school, so it wasn't as much time that I could be there, but occasionally when he was with ESPN, I could meet him on the road and kind of see, maybe sit in the booth with him for a game or something like that, and see that whole experience. So baseball definitely stood out, but I still feel and would have felt that way that any of the major professional sports and really a lot of sports now, probably outside of that, I'm interested in doing too.
Very nice. Favorite hockey team?
Toronto Maple Leafs, absolutely.
Montreal Canadiens fan growing up in Toronto.
Oh, that's fair. It's fair. I get it. I
Was
get it.
not easy. I got the family from Montreal, so it's always been a thing for me. Just a question about like live commentary, kind of like getting into that. So like what would you say is like one of the toughest things about preparing to do live commentary? Obviously it's unpredictable. Things happen that, you really can't plan for. How do you kind of prepare for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest challenge, I think, is you have to go into a game almost expecting everything and knowing that something's going to happen, especially in a sport like baseball. Something's going to happen almost every day that you were not prepared for. There's going to be a rule you never even thought of that comes up. There's going to be a guy playing a position he shouldn't. And so you really have to be comfortable with preparing yourself for a million things that aren't going to happen. I'll have a lot of notes down and a lot of different things, and I'll use 3 to 5% of whatever I put down in a lot of games. But if I only focused on Aaron Judge when the Blue Jays were playing the Yankees and did a million notes on him hitting homers, that's going to be the day that Austin Wells hits 3 home runs. Like you have to be prepared for everything and know that you can't at the same time. But that's probably the biggest challenge is trying to make sure that whatever scenario comes up, you're going to be best equipped to deal with that because it's the best and worst thing, but I think it makes it most fun about doing live sports and doing live broadcast of any kind is that you're really rolling with the punches and you don't know what's coming as opposed to, a studio situation, a taped thing where you have you have the ability to kind of pivot back and forth.
That was really interesting what you said about only using 3 to 5% of your notes. So you just over prepare, and that's just the way to go, eh?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I do too much at times. I'm not sure, but I won't feel comfortable going into a game unless I know that, there are now 28 guys on the Marlins who are going to be playing the Blue Jays at the time we recorded this today. And I have to be prepared for any of those 28 guys to be the star of the game and anything to happen along with the Blue Jays. So I feel comfortable if I can go into a broadcast and know that I have that kind of fallback with my preparation. If I don't have that, then I'm going to feel a lot less confident. And you'll probably hear it in my voice and the way that I'm talking about things because I'm going to be more unsure about where I'm going.
I like it. So, what are some kind of like changes or trends that you see that are changing in the industry? Obviously, sports broadcasting is evolving by the year. What are some kind of new things that you've seen over the last couple of years?
I think it's a much more versatile industry than maybe it used to be. I think if you look 20 years ago, if you did broadcast, you did broadcast. If you were a writer, you were a writer. If you did sports talk radio, you did sports talk radio. And that was kind of the end of it. And you had one job, and that is what it is. And I think today you're seeing more and more, people kind of being mixed throughout. You might see someone on the studio show for a Jays game, then they're on the TV broadcast doing it live. They might write a column at some point, and I think that there's a lot of different examples of that, both in Canada and especially in the U.S. and also doing a lot of that stuff through social media and other platforms. So I think that a lot of companies probably are looking for people who can do a lot of different things at this point because there's so many different ways to broadcast or to communicate to people that there didn't used to be, that there's a little bit less of a this is your job and that's what it is, and a little bit more of a wide scope of what you're doing.
And obviously, with a lot of jobs in the broadcasting industry, right? Like we see a lot of like junior teams that are now doing broadcasting. We see a lot of junior C, B, A, every sport, basketball, baseball. So there's lots of opportunities. But what's one way you think that maybe a broadcaster, someone interested in getting into the field, can stand out in a way, like kind of like make themselves known? So, like, what's one piece of advice you can give to someone to really stand out?
I mean, it definitely doesn't hurt to have a fairly active social media, although I do think that strategy is being used by a lot of people. So even within that, it's hard to stand out. I think the best way to do it is to really within your broadcast be yourself and have your own style. You try as hard as you can to not, you're going to take things from influences and you're not, going to ignore the fact that people you really like you might want to do some things kind of like them, but as much as you can be yourself and show your personality, I think when you're doing a game or when you're writing a column or when you're on a show, I think that's what's going to help because a lot of people, they try to be something that they think is really good, but a lot of other people are doing that, and you all end up kind of sounding the same. If you focus on why you really like sports, what's making you really excited about this game, the stories that you're really interested in, then I think you're going to show your personality, which is the most unique thing about every person. So if you can do that, you'll stand out from the pack, I think, broadcast wise.
I love it. So, in terms of like being a commentator, right? You're working a lot, you got mornings, nights, whatever. How do you make sure that you stay sharp with so much information to absorb? And how do you make sure that you keep on improving?
Yeah, I mean it's it takes work. Staying sharp, like you have to make sure, despite the fact that you might work late and you might have a day game tomorrow, you got to make sure you sleep. Like you have to make sure you take care of yourself. It's an industry where you can easily stop doing that, or let that slide a little bit because the schedule at times, especially in baseball, can be a little bit hectic. So I think you really have to make sure that you're in the best frame of mind to do what you have to do, and then a lot of time management. If you want to improve, carve out some time to listen to your own broadcasts. It could be in the car or on the subway headed down to where you're going to go. Maybe it's, you have some friends or colleagues in the industry whose opinions you trust, and you flip them a little bit of tape of yours and ask them for feedback. And sometimes people will do that where they trade it back and forth. So that's a big thing overall. And then the absorbing of information is a lot of, again, pre-planning and time management. You want to, make sure that, if the Marlins are coming up on a Friday and it's a Thursday, don't start preparing for them on a Thursday if possible. If you can stay, I try to stay at least a series ahead a little bit on my information, while making sure that I update things when things change. But if I can do it piece by piece, then I'm not trying to learn about 28 guys in one day. I can learn about seven guys one day, seven guys the next day for 4 days, and it sinks in a little bit more. If you just cram all of it at once, you might wake up the next day and realize that while you got all your notes down, you don't remember really anything that you said, and you don't want to be looking at your computer a whole time you're doing a game. So most of it comes down to time management, I think, and really just making sure that you're on top of everything, whether it's your work or your personal life.
Yeah, because like obviously these guys, when you're starting out, you got a lot of notes, you got a lot to learn. Remember when I'm starting to do my first broadcast here at TMU, it's like I'm cramming to get every single person's name because I don't know them. But as you kind of become more of an experienced broadcaster, you're around a team for a while. Do you feel that it gets easier to be able to broadcast a team when you have a little bit more information just off the dome, or does it still stay a very difficult task at all times?
I think it gets easier, especially with a sport like baseball, but I would imagine too with other sports. When you're around, I'll be doing whatever my 153rd game or something today. So there's a lot that I know about these guys just from watching them every single day, and I that I don't necessarily need to put down on paper. If Davis Schneider comes up with a chance to walk off the game today, I know that he walked off the 14 inning game against the Pittsburgh Pirates, I think in June, back then. So there is, I think, a comfortability you get also with some of the frequent teams you play against. If it's a divisional rival like the Red Sox or the Rays or the Yankees or the Orioles, well, by the end of the season, I've seen them now 12, 13 times rather than the Marlins, who I will see for the first time coming up here in the last weekend of the series. So it does get easier. You can't let it fool yourself into not preparing for it in one sense, but you do start to get a bit of a feel and talking to the guys every day too and stuff like that. You kind of you understand the dynamics and the story of the season a little bit more. So it gets easier for sure.
Right, so are you going to be at the Rogers Center tonight?
I will. I
I'm,
will.
I'm going to
Yeah.
be at the game. I'm going to be at the game too tonight. I'm going with my dad and our softball team that we play on. So I'll definitely try and see you at some point.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
I'll
That's
send you a
awesome.
text, see what section you're at. If I can bug you before or after,
Yeah.
come say hello.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, I know today you're doing a podcast before the game, so that's not your usual way to prepare for a game. But can you walk us through like the average day before a game? Start from the morning. What do you usually do to prepare for a broadcast?
Sure. So if it's let's just say it's a night game at Rogers Center like
Yeah.
today, so it's 7 o'clock. Get up 8 or 9 o'clock. If it's we had a 10 inning game recently, I might skew toward 9 if it goes late, but get up there, make sure that you get some breakfast in. I have a couple things like I try to exercise or read something just before to get my mind in the right spot, and then finishing up my preparation usually like let's say I did 21 of the 28 Marlins the last 3 days, knock out the last seven. Then I'm gonna, take my scorebook out probably around lunchtime, start to fill out what I can do there. It's some information around that before I know the lineups that will help me out later in the game. Then you dig into some articles. So probably go sportsnet.ca, MLB.com, The Athletic, the local newspapers. Try to do the same thing for the other team. Maybe even scroll back if it's a new series like today, scroll back a couple days and read some of the articles that Marlins writers might have put out the last few days just to make sure that I'm kind of up to date still with what's going on with them. Get all of that together, and then we'll usually get an update of when the clubhouse is going to be open. So on a day like today, it opens right around 3 o'clock. I live unfortunately far from Rogers Center due to traffic on the Don Valley Parkway, so I'll probably leave around 2 o'clock. Make sure I get there for clubhouse time. Fill out the lineups in my scorecard. Go down to the clubhouse, talk to some players. Manager will meet with us about an hour after clubhouse opens. So all the writers and the broadcasters go in, talk to the manager. Then it's back out on the field while the players are taking batting practice, talk to some more guys, perhaps go into the opposing clubhouse if there's stories I'm looking for there, or talk to the opposing manager. And then back upstairs, I record the manager's meeting, so I will transcribe that so that I don't misquote anyone in any situation. Finish up my scorebook, to try to scarf down some dinner at some point, and then pretty much at that point, there's maybe 30 minutes left to go. Likely to talk to the opposing team's broadcasters, if nothing else to say hi, but to share anything back and forth that we might need. It could be as simple as name pronunciations that are a little unclear, or what is Bowden Francis doing right now that's made him so effective, that kind of information back and forth. And then settle in and get ready. Broadcast starts at 7 and first pitch is at 7:07.
That's sick. So it's like a whole process, right? It's not just like show up at 6, get on at 7. It's a whole process, and it's one that you repeat daily. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a real routine for sure, but once you get into it, it's pretty nice.
One question I had actually, this is actually the most interesting one that I was going to ask. What is like the most common misconception that people have about sports broadcasting?
That's a good one. I think there's a big misconception about the information we have and how we get it and where it comes from, almost like on opposite poles. I find half the people think that I have memorized like every statistic and by piece of biographical information known to man, which is not true. I just couldn't do that. I have some really important stuff in front of me or written down in my scorebook, but I couldn't possibly do that. I do need my notes at times and stuff like that. And then I think there's another a group of people who think that there's someone there feeding me information all the time, which is also not true. There are, in some TV broadcasts, there are stats people, but that's still not, they're not feeding you 90% of what you're doing. They're getting really specific things that you could not dig up in the middle of the game related to what's going on. So I think a lot of people think that either you're some sort of statistical genius or you have no role in it at all. And it's probably a little bit more in the middle that, I have a lot of notes on the information that I need, but I'm also, reliant on my computer at times during the game. I know how to get information quickly if I need to, or I'll dig things up in between innings if I need to. And there is help on television from stats people, but they're not, the sole provider of what I'm talking about.
Very nice. Another question I had was, it was kind of like, what's the best piece of advice that you feel you've gotten from either your father or from anybody in the industry when you first started out?
Yeah, I when I just got into it, although I said my dad and I didn't work a ton together, he did give me a good piece of advice that I believe he got when he was first starting out, which was to just make it feel like you and your partner are sitting there at a bar and pretend the audience is one person and they're sitting there right beside you and just kind of talk about the game and go through it like you're all watching it and you're having a good time because everyone else is just sitting there on their couch, in their car, at a bar, wherever they may be. And that's the experience that they have. So you don't want to, if it's a big playoff game, it's one thing, but you don't want to make it too big of a deal at the end of the day. It's entertainment for a lot of people and it's fun for the most part. And so you want it to have somewhat of a friendly, casual kind of feeling so that people feel like they know you kind of in a way and that they get your personality and they're having fun along with you while you're doing the game.
Yeah, so that's a big thing, right? Just kind of like making it seem like you're just like talking to one person or yourself, not making it seem because then like the pressure starts to get on. And that kind of like leads into my next thing about pressure is obviously you're not perfect, right? Everyone makes a mistake broadcasting. And the one thing I liked is I had the opportunity to speak to Elliot Friedman, who's Sportsnet for the NHL. And one thing he said to me is that the thing about being on live broadcast is everybody sees your best moments and everybody sees your worst moments. And that was really interesting to me. So, my question for you is, was there a moment that you could think of or a time where you had a really bad broadcast? And how did you kind of get back in the flow of things during that time?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can think specifically, but I've certainly had bad broadcasts. There's no doubt about it. I do remember when I was at Syracuse University, it takes a couple years to work up to getting to the big spots to do games. And the first football game that I ever called, they were playing Liberty University, this smaller school in Virginia. And the first touchdown I ever called was a Liberty touchdown, and it was like an 80 to 85 yard rushing touchdown. And I mixed up which running back it was and called the wrong guy. And so I do remember that. I was, it's the first touchdown you call. So I was really like a little bit, anxious and really kind of worried about all of that. And we got to the commercial break, and the guy I was doing the game with just said, like, relax. There's 3 hours of game left, and in 10 minutes, no one's going to remember. And you just kind of, it's kind of, I think when everyone, if you were in a music class when you were a kid or whatever, and they say, if you play the wrong note, just make the next one the right note. And so at the end of the day, I think to a certain extent, you just have to bury it. And one of the great things about live broadcast is people are not usually rewinding or going back on it. So if you make a mistake, to a certain extent, you just have to forget about it during the broadcast. If you want to think about it and go back and listen to it and try to figure out why you made the mistake after, that's a lot healthier. But when the game goes on, you kind of have to dump everything. Like right when the top of the first is over, whether it was great or terrible, I have to completely forget about it and just focus on the bottom of the first, and then the same the next inning. Because if you're doing really well too, you might start to get a little bit overconfident and not put yourself in a good position. So you really just have to put everything behind you and work toward, doing the best you can in the next 5 minutes.
It's kind of like a sport too, right? Like when you're playing a sport, you just gotta have a sharp mindset. And it's the same thing with broadcasting, right? You're out there and you're kind of playing your own sport in a way, right? People aren't watching you guys specifically, but they're listening to you. And you guys have just as big a role in that kind of aspect.
Yeah, I mean, like I played stay-at-home defense when I was a hockey player. I was not scoring. If I made a bad play and someone scored and I tried to make up for that by scoring a goal in the next play, I was just going to cost us another one
Yeah.
at the end of the day. So yeah, like you say, you just kind of got to flush it and move on.
That's it too. Like, right, for me, like as a goaltender in hockey, right? I've been a goalie my whole life. It's one of those things where if I give up a bad goal, right, you can't change your playing style. You can't change what's worked for you your entire career. You kind of just got to do what you always do because if you try too hard, you're going to make a mistake. And
Right.
that's pretty common with anything. Talking a little bit more mentally now, like kind of towards the mental aspect of it. What has been kind of the toughest thing for you mentally? Have you ever felt any mental up and downs, kind of maybe not even in broadcasting, but maybe in your life coming up to that point, like the stress levels and stuff? Has it ever become too much for you, or have you always been able to contain it?
In terms of the actual broadcasts, it hasn't been too bad here or there. I mean, there were times early on where I was probably too harsh on myself, and had to learn to give myself a bit more of a break for making mistakes. I think, especially with a sport like baseball, but I would imagine with a lot of sports, it's tough mentally at first just to get into that schedule. Like the first summer that I did in pro baseball in the minor leagues, with the Fort Wayne Tin Caps in 2022. You move to a new place and you're working 6 out of 7 days a week, and it's a lot. It's a lot of time. And in the minor leagues, you work broadcast and then another job. So instead of showing up to the ballpark at 3 o'clock, I'm showing up to the ballpark at 10 or 11 in the morning and then going through the game and leaving. And I actually had two jobs at the time too. So that was adjusting to that schedule and adjusting to, some of the realities that you work nights and weekends a lot. If your friends, you're not going to be as free to hang out with those people. You might have a little bit less of a social life at times than you would have before. It's definitely an adjustment. I think it's one that you find out pretty quickly whether you can make that adjustment or not. And I was able to do that for sure. But it is definitely a big adjustment going into the schedule of doing broadcast, whatever sport you're on, because your job is really cool, and it's in my mind the best job that there is. But to do that, you do sacrifice a little bit from your personal life.
I love it. And just out of curiosity, a little bit more about you. What are some other like personal interests and hobbies that you engage in outside of, baseball broadcasting?
Yeah, I mean, I do watch a lot of sports. My girlfriend would say probably too much. I
Mine
do watch
too.
a
Mine
lot of
too.
sports. I enjoy playing sports. I play soccer very poorly, in an intramural league, and that's fun because I never played soccer growing up, so it's just kind of fun to try out something new. I've gotten kind of boring and nerdy these days. I tend to read a lot because I'm just tired when I get back. So I get into that kind of stuff. I enjoy watching YouTube and stuff like that. And and try to hang out with my friends when I have those free open times. But I have somewhat forgotten what hobbies are like during the baseball season, so I think I'm going to try and rediscover some of them in the winter when I have a couple more extra hours.
I love it. Keep time for other things. And one more, just a curious question. Let's say you were not a sports broadcaster, something happened, you cannot sport broadcast ever. What would your career path be if you were not in sports broadcasting?
I think what it would have been, because I did tell my parents this when I went to broadcast school, because it's somewhat risky proposition,
Yeah.
that if it didn't work out after a certain period of time, that I would go to law school and I would try
Okay.
to be a lawyer. Maybe I love the sound of my own voice and I need to talk in a courtroom if I'm not talking there. I don't know what's behind it, but I did enjoy debates and stuff like that in school or that kind of stuff in a political science class. So I wouldn't have been a politician, certainly not. But I think I probably would have tried to go into law and do something there.
No offense to all the lawyers out there, but I think you have a way cooler job right now.
Thank you.
Way
I
cooler
appreciate
job.
that.
All right, that pretty much wraps it up. We appreciate you coming on and telling your story. And one thing that's definitely gonna be taken away from this is I know there's 82 people in my program. I think a vast majority of them are looking to accomplish exactly what you have and kind of get into the same career path and succeed the way you have. So it's really cool to hear from someone who's made their mark in the industry. And I appreciate you coming on and telling your story. And hopefully things go well and we can be fighting you for your job one day.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, and hope to see you at the game tonight.
Oh yeah, for sure. All right, guys, this concludes Rattling the Brain Season 2, Episode 2 with Ben Shulman. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.